might be interested. Great. Thanks for joining this afternoon, everybody. I'm Karen Hills. I manage the Sustainable Farms and Fields program for the Washington State Conservation Commission. And I'm here along with two other program managers at the commission who will be introducing themselves shortly. And our goal today is to walk through proposed changes to program guidelines. We're at the 45-day comment period is open right now. I know that for some folks, it's easier to kind of hear those proposed changes walked through rather than to just read all the documents. So we wanted to hold this webinar. We're going to try to stick with our time schedule today that was on the slide that was just up, just kind of keeping in mind that some participants might be interested in just a subset of the programs, maybe not all three of them. So let's start with some introductions of the commission staff who are here that will be presenting today. I've already introduced myself. Maybe Balana, could you just give us a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. Yeah, my name is Balana, and I manage the Riparian plant propagation program, and I will be second in line to go over some of the proposed updates for the program's guidelines.
Thanks, Balana. And Amy?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Amy Martin, Riparian Grant Program Manager.
Great. Thanks, both of you. And we also have some other commission staff on the line as well. So I guess just to kind of orient us, each of us will be walking through the proposed guideline changes for the programs that we manage. And these program guideline changes were brought to the March Commission meeting, and they're now out for their 45-day review period, as I mentioned. And we're going to be available to answer clarifying questions in order to help those that are on the webinar provide any comments they might like to provide. We do ask that your comments be submitted through the form stack form so that we can collect them all in one place. So just know that if you voice a comment or put it in the chat, that's fine. But we're also asking you to fill out the form just kind of for our process. Public comments will close on Sunday, May 4th at midnight. And kind of following the public comment period, the program managers will collect the comments. Sometimes this may mean that there will be further changes to the guidelines or providing additional clarification. And then the program managers will be presenting these to the commission at the May meeting, and we'll be asking the commission to adopt the revised guidelines. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the commission website for other folks to be able to reference. And then I did just want to note that there's one other commission program that has proposed guideline updates that are also currently in their public comment period, and that's the Disaster Assistance Program. So Bill Eller manages that one. He has already held a separate webinar on those guidelines. If you have questions on that, you can reach out to him. Okay, so I guess I just want to pause before we get started and see if there's any logistical questions or any questions about anything that I've said so far. Okay, hearing none, I'll keep moving forward. You can feel free to drop things in the chat as we go. I think for the Sustainable Farms and Fields portion of the webinar today, we're going to be, I'm going to ask that, we hold till the end to answer questions, but you're welcome to drop them in as we go. So just to orient everybody and provide a little background, the Sustainable Farms and Fields program provides grant funding to conservation districts and other public entities to make it easier and more affordable for farmers and ranchers to implement climate smart practices and projects. So those are practices and projects that increase carbon sequestration and or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This program has been around for a few years now. The first fiscal year of funding was in 2023. And since then, over 7.3 million has gone to fund 155 projects at 33 of Washington's 45 conservation districts, as well as at one county, through one county government. So great work by many districts implementing these projects. And as the program develops, we're working to update these guidelines to improve implementation. So I started a process in late 2024, working with conservation district staff who are interested in participating in these updates. So I've already had some conversations with some of you about sort of proposed changes to the guidelines, and we'll continue that process today and through our public comment, 45-day public comment period. So what I'm presenting today is the result of the work that has occurred so far, and definitely want to express gratitude to the district staff who have engaged in this process. So what I am going to do right now, if I can get my technology to work here, is to share the, hold on just one second. I'm going to share the redlined version of the guidelines. Hopefully someone can confirm that you're able to see that.
You're good.
Okay, good. That always gives me some comfort to know that I'm not the only one looking at it. Okay, so I'm just going to start in on where the first changes are in this document, which is in this general requirements section, which is on page 5. So we just did a little bit of cleanup in here to have some subheadings and move things around and just make it a little bit easier for people using this document to find the information. So you'll see the green font, which just indicates where some text was moved around. It's not necessarily anything new or different that's been added. What I'm going to do is point out the actual changes that we're proposing here. The first one is, to this carbon light plans. This was called out as one way that districts may choose to provide technical assistance to producers. We're now calling those carbon farm plans because Snohomish Conservation District, along with a number of other districts around the state, are working on developing a template for that. And so we have just revised that wording to align with that effort. And I'm just going to scroll down. Hopefully I don't give anyone motion sickness as we walk through this red line document. And in this project timing section, we added this clarifying text here saying that the best management practice must be implemented by June 30th. The exception to this requirement would just be for small amounts of, for example, seed packets distributed for planting without a specific location identified. So for example, as part of an outreach event. That was something that had been in the frequently asked questions document that we're just proposing to move into the program guidelines. Moving down here, we have changed this wording to align with grants and contracts manual to say that work must be underway on all awarded sustainable farms and fields projects within 120 days of the funding allocation. That was just a little cleanup that we needed to do to be consistent with the grants and contracts manual. Continuing to scroll down, no changes to this piece. We still have the same types of fundable projects. And we're going to continue down to this section 4, which is eligible climate smart practices. And what we're proposing to do here is to actually move the list of eligible climate smart practices from the program guidelines into a separate document that will be linked to. And the reason for this is it just allows a little more flexibility for the technical advisory and review committee to add practices, add clarifying language next to practices without having to crack open the program guidelines every time to do that. So we added this text here that says the list of approved climate smart practices will be updated as needed by the Sustainable Farms Technical Advisory and Review Committee, and the links to the current approved practices will be updated before each application window opens. So this is just kind of an opportunity to make the process a little bit smoother. We're not aiming to make any major changes, but every once in a while there might be something that comes onto our radar that would be a good fit. And it would be nice to be able to do that in a way that doesn't involve quite as much process if there's not other updates needed to the guidelines. So I'm going to keep scrolling down. Okay, and then we get into this prioritization of proposed projects. So this committee that I mentioned, the Sustainable Farms and Fields Technical Advisory and Review Committee, this has been in existence, basically since the program started, and consists of representatives from WSDA, WSU, NRCS, and Department of Fish and Wildlife. And this is the group that really provides advisory guidance to the program and also reviews and ranks applications. So kind of what we worked with that committee previously to develop a scoring rubric, and each application that's submitted is scored according to the rubric and receives a score that's converted into a percentage of the total possible score for the type of application. So then those percentage scores kind of serve as the basis for prioritizing applications. And in addition to the scoring rubric, the selection committee may seek to distribute funding based on categories such as geography, land use type, commodity type served, and farm size served. And after 3 fiscal years of going through the process with this committee of prioritizing Sustainable Farms and Fields application, the Technical Advisory and Review Committee are looking to make some minor adjustments to the scoring rubric with the intent of ensuring that public funds are used for projects that have the broadest potential impact across the landscape. So I'm going to show the proposed changes to the scoring rubric. Essentially, I'm sorry. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm going to go slightly out of order here, but here's the scoring rubric and the proposed changes. There's 3 essential things that are being proposed here. One is to increase the possible points for partners and collaborations, especially in the category of demonstration projects. The second is to provide additional points for projects that benefit multiple landowners or land managers. And then the third is to reduce the points for the carbon dioxide equivalent impact for cost share projects to bring it kind of closer in line with how it looks for the other types of projects. And we expect that the impact of this change will be that funding, will be to broaden the impact of the funding across the landscape in terms of number of agricultural producers touched by this funding source. And I'm going to scroll up a little bit to one piece that I just kind of jumped over here. Also in this section, I'm proposing to add this text here. We've had some one-time appropriations that have come to Sustainable Farms and Fields, particularly in the 2023 legislative session that occurred, and they didn't really fit within the existing structure of Sustainable Farms and Fields very, very smoothly. So what we're saying here is that in the case of one-time appropriations administered within Sustainable Farms and Fields, that commission staff will work with a separate advisory committee for the purpose of crafting and adopting scoring criteria specific to those one-time appropriations. So just to provide a little bit of a clearer pathway for what would happen should we receive one-time appropriations again within Sustainable Farms and Fields. Okay, I'm going to scroll back over those prioritization metrics and then go to this bottom part where we've added, in addition to this, the selection committee seeking to distribute funding based on these categories such as geography, land use type, commodity type served, and farm size. We're also proposing to add text here about the selection committee may choose to award extra points to applicants that have not previously been awarded Sustainable Farms and Fields funding. And the applicant here is the Conservation District or other public entity. So this is really aimed at sort of giving the committee the leeway to provide a few extra points for maybe districts that have not been awarded Sustainable Farms and Fields funding in the past. And then there's no changes proposed for this last section, this section 6. So I am going to pause there and see if there's any questions or clarifications that I can provide. Okay, and I'm not really tracking the chat, so maybe Toyo, if you see anything in there, you can.
No questions in the chat right now.
No questions.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, we just got one. Says, is there a link to a complete list of eligible BMPs yet?
So that is being finalized for this coming application round this summer. So I will send out a communication about that as soon as we have it finalized. I'm not expecting any major changes, but yeah, that is not yet available. Okay. I guess hearing no further questions, I should just say that you are, of course, welcome to reach out to me if there's anything that comes up later that could use clarification. Always happy to have that conversation. Otherwise, feel free to provide comments in that form that Toyo dropped in the chat. She's going to be dropping those in kind of at the beginning of each section where the program managers are talking. And I think we're running a little ahead of schedule. So I guess we might just take a little pause and everybody can go, refill their tea or water or take a bio break. And we will get into the Riparian plant propagation program updates in 10 minutes at 2 o'clock. I could go ahead and share that slide again. Okay, I see we're at 2 o'clock, so we're going to move to the Riparian plant propagation program. And we'll turn it over to Balana.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get this set up while everybody's filtering back in. Hope everyone enjoyed their break. Let's see here. How does it do this? Okay. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
We can see it.
Okay. Great. I will go ahead and jump right in then. So yeah, today I'm going to just do a scroll through of the proposed guideline updates for the riparian plant propagation program. And just a little reminder on what this program is. This program has a main goal of increasing the availability of native trees and shrubs for riparian restoration to support statewide salmon recovery. And these guideline changes include entire new sections, but then also some updates to existing sections, just in response to a growing program. And same as Sustainable Farms and Fields, I've also worked with a few of you to help get these updates. So thank you so much for those that were involved. So as I go through this, I also want to mention I'm going to go section by section for these guidelines just because there's some really long spots, so I don't want any questions to get missed. So just scrolling past just the beginning there. I'll go over this part, just section 1 of the program overview. There's not a lot of changes here. We mostly just were outlining the different components of the program now that they've been developed. So for example, we outlined propagation, which is the component of the program that focuses on working with nurseries to do contract grows. We outlined cultivation, which focuses on funding for conservation districts to create holding sites. And then the last is restoration, and that component focuses on matching locally grown plants with districts and other restoration groups to be implemented into riparian projects. So that's that section there. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that specific section before I move forward? All right, hearing none, so I'll just jump right into it. So we're going to start with the propagation section, which, as I mentioned, focuses on contract grows with nurseries. We've done a few of those already, so a lot of this just outlines what that process is. So this is a brand new section in the program. We outlined eligibility. So for example, which nurseries can participate in the program. So for the purpose of this section, nurseries that have a valid business license in Washington State can participate. There's no minimum size of plant order or nursery operations as long as participants have expertise in propagating plants and also have adequate facilities to participate in these contract grows. Oh, and I forgot to mention too, I don't want to read this word for word just because there's so much of it, so I'm just going to give highlights of these sections. We also outline the eligible project type. So under the contract grows with nurseries, we can fund the actual trees and shrubs, and then we can fund the delivery of those trees and shrubs. So that's what we are limited to in this part of the program. Then under the general guidelines, we outline what that competitive solicitation looks like. So what the process is, what information is required for seed sourcing. We also have information on inspecting the site, disease and pest management, the quality of the plants. And so it's very generalized on what is inside of that competitive solicitation, but I do want to mention that each contract is unique with unique orders. This is just what is going to be general in those contracts. And then lastly, we outline the timeline and the funding process for the contract grows with nurseries. So we outline when the competitive solicitations start. So that will be released each spring. And then we outline that timeline. So when we have the solicitation process, how long the plant propagation will span, what extensions look like for the contract to make sure that the typical delivery window requested by restoration groups can be followed. So we outline that, and then we also go over how coordination goes with the restoration groups and the nurseries, and we also outline the delivery of those plants. So I think that is everything in the propagation section. Does anybody have any questions or comments in this specific section? And you're also welcome to throw things in the chat, or if you think of things later, you're welcome to message me. Oh, I see Joanna.
Yeah, just for clarification, this is only for trees and shrubs and not other like wetland species or forbs. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. It's just for riparian trees and shrubs. And those, when we do put out the competitive solicitation, we already have an order list of what those are going to be. So you should only see those in the list.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, any other questions in this section? All right, not seeing any, so I will go ahead and move forward, and we can always come back to things later if we have time. Okay, so moving on to the cultivation section of the program. So this section is funding for conservation districts for holding sites. And this was already an existing section that was adopted back in fiscal year 23. So there have just been some updates made to this based on comments and discussions with districts and partners, just to try to make sure the program runs a little bit smoother. So I'm going to go over and just highlight each of the changes here. We already had a requirement for signed agreements in the eligibility section for districts working with partners. But we have also added some guidance for what those signed agreements should include to make sure both districts and partners are protected. So, for example, I think the biggest change we added is we are now requiring that districts working with partners have guaranteed access to and use of the holding sites that are developed on partner property for the duration of any of the design life of any RPP funded infrastructure. And so that's based on NRCS standards. And then just some general things like defining the role and responsibilities, outlining a contingency plan. And then of course, we're allowing, if you want to share your draft of agreement with us, we can review that. Then we've made some changes under the eligible project types. So we kind of just outlined some things to make sure that it's clear what the holding site should be used for, which is exclusively for our RPP plant storage and not for district plant sale operations. We've now included under the procurement of native riparian trees and shrubs, allowing limited climate adapted species. There just needs to be justification in the application, and those are going to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis to assess the risk of including those. We also have a new section allowing conservation districts to purchase and or collect native riparian tree and shrub seeds for limited propagation in the program. That's a big change there. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, another big one we've changed is utilities. So we used to have a $300 monthly cap to cover utilities that pertain to the project, such as heating, electricity, water, space leasing. And so we've actually gotten rid of that cap, and we're just going to ask for any utility costs you need to be justified in the application, and we'll just review those. We've had some issues trying to make sure that districts in different areas, maybe drier areas that may need more water, are able to be funded. And then also, different districts are going to have different size holding sites. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to cover that. Okay, so moving on to general requirements, some of the changes we made in here. Again, added some more language on that maintaining the holding site for the design life of any installed infrastructure. We also included a section, kind of a protocol for what to do if you purchase plants from a nursery and they arrive diseased or damaged. Just asking that you notify us promptly so we can figure out how a refund or replacement is going to work. All right, and then for the seed collection eligibility, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to add a little bit of guidance in here to make sure that all seeds and cuttings are harvested sustainably and responsibly. And so there was a lot of work that was done with some folks on this call and other districts to make sure we have some good information here. Okay, and then a big change we have is in the timeline and funding process. So right now, the RFA isn't released in time for there to be continued funding starting July 1st, which is problematic with existing plants that need to be taken care of from the previous fiscal year. So we are proposing changing the application cycle to have a limited RFA be released each May of the preceding fiscal year for purchasing plants and maintenance of existing plants at holding sites that already have projects, so that those funds can be awarded July 1st, so there's continuity to actually care for those plants. Then we will release a separate RFA in July, and that will be for all of the eligible project types listed under the cultivation section. So that will also include expansion and all those things. So we're trying to kind of have two separate forms coming out just to make sure that we can prioritize those existing projects. We also made just a few changes to the criteria to evaluate the applications, again, to make sure we want to give priority to existing projects. So we just kind of added some information in about that. Okay, and then the last change in this section that I think is a big one is we updated the reporting for the program. Right now, we only ask for information on what infrastructure was installed and what plants are being held at the holding site, but there is a gap in knowing what projects these are being distributed to. And so we have included requiring that in the program, and this can be done in the annual reporting form, but it can also be done. We'll have another optional plant tracking form, and that's going to be open year round, and you can fill it out as many times as you like. So if you have plants moving on the go and you don't want to save it all up till the end of the fiscal year, you're welcome to put in just a couple questions about where the project is and how many plants are being moved. So there's some options for that. Okay, so before we move on to the last section, does anybody have any questions or comments for this section? All right. I don't see any hands raised. Okay. I will go ahead and move on to the last section. This one is pretty short because this section just outlines how we match plants with restoration groups. And so there's not any funding directly going to the restoration groups for this section. So in this section, eligible applicants include conservation districts, but they also include fish enhancement groups and tribes, counties, state and other government agencies, and other nonprofits. So as I mentioned, there is not any funding under this section. We are just matching native trees and shrubs to eligible groups. And this comes directly from those contract rows I talked about in the propagation section. Which brings me to the general guidelines. So the general requirements in this section outline the annual plant needs form. And so this form gathers data from districts and other restoration groups on anticipated tree and shrub needs for riparian restoration projects 2 or more years in the future. And so we use this essentially as an order form to then contract out those orders with nurseries. And so we just outline what that application includes. And then we also outline, this is just the application part. And then in the timeline and process, we outline how we're coordinating getting those orders, when that happens. And then we are also requiring, if you are a restoration group that is receiving plants, you do need to complete a receipt form within 7 days of receiving the order from the nursery. So that's just letting us know that yes, you indeed got all of the plants that you requested and that the quality is good. There's not any diseases, things like that. And then same thing for the other sections of the program. We not there. Here, we also are requiring to let us know what the distribution of those plants are to projects as well. And it doesn't have to be right when you get the plants. It can be however long in the future, you know, when you're actually going to go out and plant those. And then I don't need to go over the definitions section. So any questions about this section or just questions about the guidelines in general?
Alana, I think you have a couple comments in the chat. Drew asked
Oh,
about
thanks.
willows being acceptable.
Oh, yes. Yes, they are acceptable under the program.
And it looks like Corey is a fan of the seed collection option.
Yes, thank you, Corey. And Corey helped a lot giving guidance on this as well. So appreciate that. All right. Sedges and rushes are acceptable as well. Yes, we have a few sedges, I think, that folks have asked for. Just as long as it's not like in the wetland plants.
Can you, what do you mean by that exactly? Sorry, I don't know if I understand.
We've had it's kind of, there's been some gray area in what's classified as a shrub. And we mostly go off of the Native Plant Society list, but we've had a few that we've allowed. I have to go look through the species so I can follow up on you with that later if you'd like. Because I don't have them off the top of my head. But we did have a few gray areas. We're like, okay, that's pretty shrubby, if that makes sense.
So are you saying that sedges and rushes that aren't shrubby are not going to qualify?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry if that was not clear.
What is the reasoning for that?
It's specifically under the proviso of the program. So we can only allow trees and shrubs, and in the gray area spots, we've had discussions on that.
But aren't they also like riparian plants?
Yeah, so the program outlines specifically riparian trees and shrubs, but not just riparian plants. So if we like scroll up here, where is it here? Do I have the proviso in here? So it's just for riparian native trees and shrubs. And so not all of the sedges and rushes fall under that. So it's the shrubby ones that fall under that, if that makes sense.
Just wondering, like what is the reasoning for not allowing non-shrubby sedges and rushes that are riparian plants?
I'm not sure exactly. I wasn't around when the proviso was adopted, so I'm not sure exactly why it was specifically just trees and shrubs. From what I understand, it sounds like it's trying to keep the program small and hopefully expand to wetlandy plants later, which is something I've had discussions with folks about because I do think it is really important to include that, but it's not something that's in the program right now. I can look into that a little bit more, but I don't know why that was the decision that was made in the first place. I just know that that is what is in the proviso of the program, if that makes sense.
That's something we can comment on and potentially change or no?
Yes, please leave those comments. It's nice to hear the feedback on what you feel is needed for your riparian plantings and what plants are needed to help support riparian restoration. And so getting those comments are very helpful, and it gives us a little bit of leverage to have those discussions about potential changes in the program in the future.
Thank you.
Are you guys
Okay,
going off of the Washington Native Plant Society for like your certain area, that those plant lists?
Yeah, let me see where, I don't think we have them listed in here. Let's see, I think we might have put them down in the definitions in here. Yeah, so we only list the NRCS in here, but we've had a lot of folks that have gone off the Native Plant Society list, and it doesn't have to be by region. We've had folks getting plants from different regions. So in general, Washington State, native riparian trees and shrubs, other than some of the climate adapted species that are now being allowed in the program.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm seeing some comments here about importance of not just trees and shrubs in Eastern Washington. So yes, I definitely urge folks, if you have comments on that, please leave that in the riparian comment form. All right. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Nate? I see your hand raised. Oh,
Oh, sorry. This is David Marcel at Grace Harbor. It's
okay, no
okay.
worries.
Maybe I'm signed in wrong, but I'm probably not going to write a big comment, but just regarding like the, ground cover or your wetland species versus the tree and shrub, I just think there's a bigger discussion around the buffer width thing that's ongoing and this and that. And I guess my takeaway when I read the guidelines was that kind of made sense considering the additional benefits that shrubs or really the trees provide the riparian area versus ground cover, i.e., you know, end of life they fall in, they provide habitat benefits. So it's not to exclude the ground cover sort of species, I guess, but I would just caution against us making a big push to add those two when right now we need to be proving how 50-foot tree and shrub buffers are good enough, and to pivot into arguing for rushes and things like that. It's not going to help that specific argument. So just my 2 cents on the strategy around what we're asking for and what we ultimately want to get.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And yeah, to clarify too, when we do get these comments, and these discussions we'll have, with changing the program, it probably won't be for a while until the program grows and gets more funding. So I think it's really important to, and I'm excited to see comments coming in on this, and I'm happy to push for that, but it will take time. I will mention that. Okay. Any other comments? If not, we can stop a little early and have a little bit of a break before RGP.
All right, last but not least, we'll dive into the Riparian grant program. Can folks hear me okay? My mic's working.
Yes, you sound great.
Great, thank you, Toyo. All right, hopefully everyone has had a chance to dive in to the red line guidelines. Thank you, Toyo, for dropping those into the chat. The updated guidelines are the accumulation of a year now of project management, working one-on-one and with CD staff, asking clarifying questions, organizing our frequently asked questions, into what we hope are some improved, clarified guidelines. We held 3 conservation district work sessions where we talked through some of the changes in the strategy there. We've met with our agency partners, and our engagement is ongoing with CDs, agency staff, with DFW and ecology and WSDA, and of course with tribes as well. The basis of our guidelines is our budget proviso, which was pretty prescriptive, and also the feedback we hear from CDs about what's important in the riparian restoration realm and the work that y'all are doing every day. Also, the Climate Commitment Act funding this program plays a role in how we monitor and report out on RGP. So you'll see some of that reflected in the updated guidelines as well. I'm going to walk through some of the major updates, and I'll stop between sections for questions and comments. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the best place to submit comments is through the FormStack comment form. We can chat through some things here, but please, as soon as you can, getting those comments in, and we'll be integrating those, addressing those in our final guidelines. We've got a quick turnaround between the closing of our comment period and when we submit the final draft for consideration by our commissioners. So I do appreciate as soon as people can get those comments to us, we can start addressing those. We do have a tool that may be helpful for folks as they're looking through the changes. The changes are indexed, and we have a matrix. I'll just share my screen and pull that up quick. So this is linked with the comment form and including a location to store your notes. So if you find this handy for organizing your thoughts and comments, please feel free to use this. And you can either upload it or copy paste into the FormStack form, which is organized by the section here. Okay. All right, I'm going to check that folks can see the guidelines screen now. Are the guidelines showing up?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And I can't see the chat, so when we get to that point, appreciate if someone can help ping me if there's something, a question or comment in the chat. Oh, I should also note that we will have to remain a little bit adaptive as the legislature is finalizing their review of our proviso language, and then of course the final budget. So are currently operating with 25 million of capital funding and 3 million of operating, and of course there's a lot going on right now with the budget, and so we'll keep an eye on that and how we may need to accommodate the final proviso language and budget outlook into our final guidelines. I won't go through every change because if you've gotten into here, you can see there were a lot of clarifications that we added. But I'll start with the highlight of critical riparian management zones as the foundation of where work can occur for the riparian grant program. So the definition of a critical riparian management zone is area adjacent to freshwaters, wetlands, and marine waters that has a locally or regionally identified as an area where salmon recovery efforts would significantly benefit from enhanced protection or restoration. So we haven't had a lot of attention to wetlands and marine waters, but highlighting that that is an option, those shorelines. And then clarifying for what salmon recovery is and which species those are. We've clarified based on governor's salmon recovery planning efforts that salmon, steelhead, trout, and char that are at risk or identified in salmon recovery plans are eligible for RGP funds. So that helps capture the northeast region of the state where West Slope cutthroat and bull trout have recovery efforts underway. And also we are proposing to include areas where reintroduction efforts are being planned and coordinated. So we added some clarification to that definition there. Oops, trying to jump to my bookmark. There we go. Our timelines remain similar. We'll probably remove some of these dates so we don't have to make these edits year after year. But there is a note in here. As many of you know, we are pursuing an option to fund projects that span beyond one biennium. So we added some language here that if that becomes the case after we've built up our administrative capacity to manage awards in that way, that will be an option for RGP awards. So the timelines that we may have mentioned in here for the end of the biennium will communicate in the direct awards to the CDs if those timelines change. So don't assume anything. We're still working in that direction, but this will help open up that opportunity if it becomes available without having to open up the guidelines again. We are proposing to review applications monthly instead of every 2 weeks. This fits probably a more realistic timeline of how awards are made. And also the 2-week timeline can be a little bit hard to manage administratively. We have some clarification around scope changes. So sometimes we communicate those over email, but clarifying that if it is a new project, we can't project swap with an award. We do need a new application to come in for a new project location. We've added a little more information around reporting requirements. We'll be working on our final reporting form for the 25-27 biennium. And we'll have that done before the end of this year. But just clarifying what the purpose of that is. A lot of it is gathering the right information to be able to report outwards on the good work that conservation districts are doing and the success of voluntary restoration efforts, particularly in the salmon recovery realm. We'll also be updating Climate Commitment Act requirements as we hear from Ecology, who is tasked with managing Climate Commitment Act reporting for what changes and updates we need to make there. But that form will be managed as a separate form. And there is another webinar we have posted from maybe, I think, a couple months ago for more information on the Climate Commitment Act reporting requirements. And we do have a section addressing Climate Commitment Act and the RGP. It's very likely RGP will continue to be funded out of the Climate Commitment Act. So there are particular considerations towards direct and meaningful benefits to overburdened communities. So this language is similar to what we have on our Climate Commitment Act webpage, but just highlights that as projects are being planned and implemented, conservation district staff should consider how their work is addressing this area and benefiting overburdened populations. We have a clarification around subcontracting. So it's great that many of you are working with different partners, Trout Unlimited, your local fisheries enhancement groups. And so this is a clarification that aligns that work and the installation of BMPs that occurs through a subcontract with our grants and policies manual. So there's still some administrative tasks associated with the subcontract and the landowner engagement between the partner and the installation and management and maintenance of those BMPs. So this subcontracting requirement addresses those. All right, and that is section 2, which is a lot of our administrative requirements. Are there any questions on any of this material? Joanna?
Yeah, you mentioned the potential possibility of funds spanning beyond the biennium. What would that look like? Would it be more similar to what RCO has with like a 5-year timeline? And how likely do you think that is to happen? Because that would be fantastic.
Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity there. We don't know how long that timeline would be, but yeah, I expect it would look a lot like the ecology and RCO system. We'd still have that language of, pending reappropriation. Reappropriation has been fairly common. Of course, we're in kind of a new scene now. But yeah, we're still determining or considering some of those timelines, but I expect 4 or 5 years is not off the table. Did I answer all the question you had there?
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Then we'll move on to section 3. All right, eligible project types and activities. Here again is where we bring in our proviso language and that projects must relate to salmon recovery efforts in the state. And we clarify how we connect our projects to salmon recovery efforts. And that's either through, is your work occurring in a salmon recovery region and riparian improvements or, water quality improvements are addressed in a plan that is available. There are some areas where salmon are present, but it's not within a salmon recovery region. So if your planning effort is outside of that region, there's an opportunity to link to that plan. And if you are in an area where neither applies, there hasn't been a planning effort for your region yet or your area, you can connect with WDFW to help check that box that your project relates to a salmon recovery priority and will benefit species of concern there. And this helps us to check that box in our proviso and focus our efforts in on state salmon recovery priorities. We don't have any changes to eligible lands. You will notice that we have pulled out reference to the tiered incentives portion of the program. that tiered incentives is currently paused while we revisit our incentive structure, and that will come together. We expect later this summer or fall, we'll roll that back out again is the current plan. So you'll see that language is struck for now. We do have a note here that potential program participants, landowners, managers, lessees, should be informed about local land use codes that may apply after they have a mature riparian buffer. This is not totally my area of expertise, but there may be critical areas ordinance or other local codes that come into play that may legally or prevent an individual from legally removing their riparian forest buffer after they've maintained it for its 15 years. Jumping to project types. This scope crossed out was just moved to another area. We have a clarification on the program outreach section. We've made a more clear list of what opportunities are available to be funded through outreach. Clarified the eligible expenditures. And that the activities can't be related to general district outreach, but must be targeted towards engaging new landowners in to participate in your riparian restoration program efforts. This is language that's carried over from our budget directives of identifying and implementing new project work. We've also clarified what metrics should be captured related to outreach. We're hoping for estimates of the number of individuals engaged, what general geographic areas you're reaching out to, and hopefully the outcome, how many new projects were identified or initiated from those efforts. We understand that often folks are interacting with lots of people, so these may be estimates. But this is a really helpful metric for us to explain the outcome of our work. We also have a clarification that youth-focused activities are not eligible. This is work like classroom programs or activities that are really focused on like school-age children who are, not the ones that might initiate a riparian planting project. Planting activities with youth volunteers is something that can be funded, and that would be most appropriate as a DIP, the planting and BMP installation. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions on this material so far? Joanna?
Yeah, I'm just wondering on the project signage. I know we've worked with some partners about potentially putting up some signs on some of the waterways. I don't see how that would necessarily maybe directly lead to more projects on the ground. So I'm just wondering if you have additional detail there or if I'm reading into it too much.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it comes down to the specifics of the project. If the signage is related, could be considered a neighborhood advertisement, and maybe it might help with some contiguous riparian planting efforts. There's a lot of different ways that could be executed. So it's kind of the project should be about, generating new interest, and that can occur in a lot of different ways. So it's a little hard to speak to some specifics.
Yeah, I guess I can ask you more specific project related questions separately.
I'm gonna jump in just to say that I'm pretty sure that this was part of the CCA requirements, so it's not necessarily coming from us. It's kind of like a holdover from the Climate Commitment Act branding stuff. So, but we can definitely help with that if you have questions about specific projects, of course.
Page. Thanks, Joanna. David. Oh, do you have your hand up?
I just wanted to chime in and say that we have a lot of sophisticated marketing in our district, but still to date, the best marketing is a good project done, and the signage shows one neighbor to another that their neighbor who might have been anti-government for a long time is working with the conservation district, and they start to ask questions. So I'm very happy to see this be included in the guidelines. It's super important. So thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think the site-specific signage can have some really good results. And so in the application, just clarifying that that's kind of the intent of the work, is to generate interest among neighbors and contiguous planting efforts, because that's what we want. We want a lot of work in targeted areas and very impactful. Okay, I will move on. Let's see. We've added references to NRCS's 9-step conservation planning process and Department of Fish and Wildlife's Riparian Ecosystems, Volume 1, and then Volume 2 is referenced in the other technical resources as the primary guidance for developing new projects and considering riparian functions and what type of planting, what buffer width should occur in order to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. Of course, with considerations of your site-specific limitations. We've added a section on eligible expenditures and where pre-approval is needed. And we intend to update our application so that with more prompts so that you can indicate what equipment and training and different things you're interested in, so we can capture those ahead of time. There's a clarification here that training must be related to improving the technical knowledge of staff to plan and implement successful RMZ projects. And a clarification of when staff time is categorized as DIP and when as TA and planning. This is like, the line is maybe a little bit fuzzy, but once staff are like on the ground planting as if it were a cost share project and the work's being implemented, that's kind of the cutoff of when it becomes a DIP. And we're trying to track those metrics so that we can capture accurately how much of our efforts go into planning the projects and then how much does it cost to like actually install the work. So I appreciate your effort to help making those distinctions. We have an update proposed for the cost share rate. Originally, these projects were required to have 100% cost share, but we're leaving that up to the districts now, and we instead encourage 100% cost share rate. There's a clarification that plan practices need to be retained and maintained for the NRCS practice design life. And that information we have in some spreadsheets that I believe are available on our CPDS webpage. Some small language edits to the DIP. And this bit is removal of the tiered incentives reference. Regarding maintenance, we propose to allow maintenance to be eligible for up to 10 years instead of 5. And maintenance after 10 years will be the responsibility of the landowner, manager, etc. And we had some questions about how to organize maintenance responsibilities in landowner agreements, or how to organize that body of work when working with a landowner. So we have a little bit of guidance here on how to document the roles and responsibilities there. And a clarification on the maintenance project reporting, to include the number of participants and the acreage maintained, site locations, funding source for the original installation, and frequency of maintenance should be kept on your records, your CD records, so that that information is available on request. That helps us track the impact of our funding, as well as we're preparing some of the regional and statewide reports. And then regarding permanent protection, this is an area we are have spent a lot of time considering our capacity. And where we've landed is to provide funding for planning efforts associated with permanent protection projects for riparian areas, meeting the RGP criteria. So districts or subcontracted partners may conduct some of these early planning activities in order to prepare an application for like an easement or an acquisition project. And then an option that Riparian grant program can provide up to 50% of match or leveraged funds towards a project. And this is for a project where another public entity or another entity will hold the rights to that easement. So the Conservation Commission, without the administrative capacity to really be very involved in these types of transactions, can rely on another public funder to be administering an administrative lead on those acquisitions. See, and I think that is the end. There's a few pages. So reimbursement of reimbursable costs, and this is a lot from the Farmland Preservation Program guidelines. Are there any questions? Oh, are there any questions on these eligible projects? All right, eligible best management practices. We have a few changes here. Again, emphasizing, or I guess maybe not changes, but clarifications. Emphasizing the relationship of the project to the salmon recovery region, or what downstream benefits will occur. We're proposing that if a project involves like a large engineered structure, not talking BDAs or small, more process-based stuff, but large rock or wood placement, if implementation funding is being applied for, then we receive engineered designs, and that effort that would relate to the project's readiness to proceed. It's not a technical evaluation, but just to know that we're not obligating money to a project to implement a project that might still have many hurdles along the way to get through. We don't, and that's our typical process of avoiding having return funds at the last minute. So this would be a readiness to proceed evaluation. And of course, funding is available in TA and planning for the design work associated with these projects. We have a clarification that proposed that livestock exclusion is required. We may consider water gaps on a case-by-case basis with a good justification of why complete exclusion is not possible. And with considerations towards the current NRCS recommendations for salmon bearing streams and that this is a salmon recovery program. We are clarifying that the riparian forest buffer practice and hedgerow practice where salmon are present, the minimum buffer width should be 50 feet. And we have guidance about how to determine whether salmon are documented or presumed present. And we have exceptions to the minimum buffer width that will be considered. And that includes, do you have property lines in the way? Are there easements or other structures that are not making it possible? Utility or topographical barriers, utility lines. So there's a few exceptions here because we know that there are some places that 50 feet is not physically or legally possible. And we have a clarification that riparian herbaceous cover is possible where there's easements that prevent woody installation. And a consideration to where it's not typically a part of the ecosystem where you are installing your buffer. We're also making a clarification about the tree shrub establishment practice that we're going to use this as a maintenance practice. So if you're installing plants within that 10-year period in a buffer to add diversity or some like successional jumpstart, instead of using the riparian forest buffer practice and reporting a metric of that new width, we'll use the tree shrub establishment practice so that we can gather the acreage and number of plants and keep some of our metrics a little bit tidy. There's been a little bit of confusion. I think different folks across the state, myself included, were taught to use this practice maybe when installing a riparian forest buffer. But we're going to make that clarification that a new buffer, it will be the herbaceous cover hedgerow or riparian forest buffer. Tree shrub establishment will be when you're filling in order to improve riparian function at your project site. All right, for your consideration and comment, we have aquatic organism passage, which is culvert replacement most often as a potential new eligible practice, and also the stream habitat improvement practice. Other than that, the eligible BMPs are largely the same. Oh, we did pull off wetland enhancement because that's more related to artificial ponds and wetland restoration would be the better fit for our program. A clarification on pumping plant practice. It's for livestock watering facilities and riparian irrigation. And water wells will not be eligible for domestic or drinking water situations. And that is related to the NRCS practice spec there. All right, are there any comments or questions we can talk through on the eligible practices section?
I appreciate the clarification on the three practices used to implement riparian restoration and the tree shrub establishment to maintain the projects.
Thanks, Shuvel. Okay. Joanna.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the minimum buffer width being 50 feet for riparian forest buffer. We have quite a few smaller projects where there may not be a property line or physical barrier, but going beyond 35 feet kind of really limits landowner control of their property or what they're able to do. So I think moving up to 50 feet from 35 is going to mean we have a fair number of projects that just don't get implemented. So I don't know if there are ways that we can document that as an exception, if the landowner is not able to give up that amount, or if there's another workaround, but I don't know. I guess I'm of the opinion that some buffer is better than no buffer. And I'm wondering if we can work around that.
Yeah, please, yes, and please, folks, I know that this could be limiting for implementing some projects. And we're happy to receive those comments through our form stack as well. We're hoping this is aligned with the current NRCS recommendation for Washington of where fish habitat is a concern that you're planning for. 50 feet is the recommended buffer width. And we look to NRCS for a lot of our guidance. We do hope there are opportunities with some other, if RGP is not the right fit, I'd be curious if there are maybe other opportunities through other SCC programs or NRCS for these types of projects. But yeah, we can still keep thinking about this. I think that the considerations of this program as a salmon recovery prioritized program is where that buffer width becomes really important in riparian function. But we do know that this may exclude some work from occurring under this program. And I look forward to hearing comments about how this change will affect the work in your area. Moving on. We don't have many changes to the project prioritization section. We list, these are from our proviso, the list of what plans and prioritization efforts should be used to help plan projects. And in the case that funding becomes limited, we will need to develop a scoring system and funding highest priority of competing project applications. That's not the situation that we've been in, and we'll need to adapt as we see what the final budget outcomes are for this next biennium. Additional proposal evaluation criteria, this bit that was struck is related to something that was mentioned previous in the guidelines. And that is the final of the redlined updates. We'll attach the updated proviso as a appendix to this document once it becomes available. Some of the details are still being worked out, but it appears to be largely the same as last biennium. I say that now and I may jinx it, but to be determined how that finalizes. Are there any other questions or comments? They're welcome here, or please feel free to get in touch with me.
Amy, it sounds also like you and your team did a good job of already listening to a lot of conservation district comments. And thank you.
Hope so. Thank you, Chevelle.
Amy, this question isn't necessarily directly related to the guidelines, but do you have an idea of the timeline in July of when grant applications may be open?
We are working on updating our applications now, and hoping to open up an application period ahead of the new fiscal year, because we do want to get projects funded as soon as possible after the start of the biennium. So I don't have a solid timeline, but I do recommend to folks to start planning out your scope of work for the next biennium in preparation for that opening up. I'm sorry I don't have a good date for you today, but we're hoping for sometime in May.
Okay, no, that's great. I didn't know if we were going to be waiting until the new biennium, but it sounds like that's going to be opening up before then. So,
Yes, we're certainly trying.
clarification.
Yes, thank you. All right, last call for questions.
You have one in the chat here, Amy. From Nikki, it says, can you comment more on the status of the incentive structure?
Yeah, so we have a good foundation for that work. We need to make sure that our calculator is truly incentivizing out to site potential tree height, which is the ultimate goal of this program, is to encourage buffers as wide as possible, so that we're accomplishing as many riparian functions as we can. And our current calculator doesn't quite do that. So we need to take another look at the structure of that program. So we have an ongoing effort with Department of Ecology on an EPA grant, and we are partnered with them to explore a similar question. What are the agricultural incentives in particular that are needed in order to operate incentive program where people actually enroll in it, which is a question that's hard to answer. So we're gonna follow along with that effort through the next few months. And we're still kind of shaping up how we will engage, setting up work groups with our agency partners and with conservation districts to get through that work. So please keep your ears open for those opportunities. But yeah, this work will go, we anticipate, throughout the summer, and we hope to have something in front of our commissioners around late summer. But we do understand how important this part of our program is, and it's a really good opportunity in light of everything we are working on and in relation to CREP. So remains a really important area for us. We're still kind of organizing ourselves around how we'll structure that work. I do appreciate everyone's patience with that. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Comment deadline, May 4th. You can spend your Sunday mornings submitting form stack. And please, as early as you can, as early as you're able, we can start working through the comments and the feedback for RGP and turning it into a great draft, great final for the next biennium. Karen or Balana, did you have any?
No, just thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate your engagement.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.